This episode was co-produced with the Swiss Entrepreneurs Foundation, a non-profit organization which aims to support startups and promote the Swiss ecosystem capable of commercializing innovative technologies. Over the next few weeks, we will be releasing a total of 6 bonus episodes. These episodes will focus on the Swiss Entrepreneurs Foundation's Upscaler program, designed to help rapidly growing startups, as well as on the SWESA, the Swiss Entrepreneurs and Startup Association, which represents all companies and institutions that want to further optimize the economic policy framework in Switzerland. To find out more about the Swiss Entrepreneurs Foundation, visit swissef.ch. And now, on with the show.
Surely not a country where, the risk-taking would be written on every forehead. It's actually more the contrary, as you know.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and hands-on learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Karim, a very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. Also enjoying being here. Thank you for having me.
You are a passionate startup and venture capital lawyer and also a partner at Keller Halskara. And today we're going to talk about your involvement with a Swiss association called SWESA, or Swiss Entrepreneurs and Startup Association. So first of all, I'm interested to learn more about why you actually decided to join SWESA. What was your personal motivation to become part of it?
Very simple reason. I'm totally convinced that a political lobbying organization that is speaking on behalf of startups and the venture capital ecosystem is required. Why? Not only because I'm trying to make a living in this business area, but also if you look at the more fundamental data surrounding this, it's a no-brainer that we should have such an organization, because in the last 10 years, we have had a huge privilege in the sense that numbers of investment rounds and the number of invested, or the amount of invested capital into Swiss startups has known only one direction, and that was upward. So in other words, we're witnessing a great growth and development with respect to the Swiss startup and venture capital scene, which is not something that you as a country should take for granted. And it was also the case that in the past few years, there was little coordination in the startup ecosystem. I mean, there have always been some initiatives, and in certain industry verticals, you had more organizational efforts and undertakings as opposed to others. But there was never really a coherent, systematic approach to making sure that the startups in this country get a voice on the political level, especially the national political level. And SWESA was exactly formed to do just this. So for me, it was an absolute no-brainer to support this.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. And what is your role at SWESA? What do you do there?
So I'm a board member, and in that capacity, obviously, together with my colleagues, thinking about what should be the strategy going forward, what are the agenda points, where do we have pain points in the ecosystem which require attention, in the sense that political lobbying would be warranted. So we meet periodically in order to discuss the agenda and the progress that we're making, the priorities, etc. So at the end of the day, it's the board of an association, and we act like you would expect the board of an association to act, except that we always have a lot of fun and that we are really keen to bring about some impact in this area.
Yeah, I guess that's a crucial part of being involved in such an association. So you already talked about the importance, of having an impact for startups on a political level. So there are still today many political hurdles facing startups in Switzerland. If you had to choose one, what speaks to you the most, or what do you really think needs the most fixing from your perspective?
And as you mentioned, it's actually difficult to pick one because there are actually a number of topics that I would like to focus on. But if you really ask me to pick just one for the benefit of our session, it would clearly be the facilitation of access to talents. We are a landlocked country. We are small. We have great universities, so we are creating very knowledgeable people, yes. But every startup that is about to grow requires access to talent. And we all know it's not easy to recruit personnel in a growing startups for a number of reasons. And Switzerland, as a very expensive country to live in already, doesn't have an advantage when it comes to that, despite all the life quality that you have in this country at the same time. But it's a struggle for many startups to get access to talent. Obviously, not so much when we're talking about EU, EFTA member state citizens. There we know we can still fortunately benefit from the bilateral treaties. But when it comes to the so-called third country citizens, Drittstaatsangehörige, the requirements that you need to meet as a company, as a potential employer, are really extraordinarily high. And there are a few technical aspects to that entire process which make it very cumbersome. And that's where I believe one of the pain points lies from a political perspective. So we should try to focus on this area and think about how we can improve the system.
Absolutely. And that's actually also, that resonates very well with the community. So we are embedded in the startup community, and many companies actually face that challenge that you just described. 4 or 5 years ago, it was all about employee stock option plans and how to tax them or not to tax them. That got at least eased a bit or resolved to a certain degree. And now the next challenge is just around the corner, what you just described with the hiring of foreigners. Maybe just to take a step back here, why does this actually exist, this hurdle? Like, is that the history of Switzerland that we just make it a bit more tricky for other people to come here and work from third states? Or what's actually the reason why we have this challenge today for startups?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an understandable constraint that we are looking at. It's not something that is extraordinary. Also, if you compare it to the political systems of other countries, whether they are around us or elsewhere. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that your country is not attracting too many people who end up being dependent on the state, because that is the main concern, that as a country, you will have to make sure that social security is awarded to people who cannot make their living, so to speak. So that's one of the main reasons and rationales why you would have certain constraints on the freedom of movement in general. The more from a politically charged perspective, one could also say, that there are views out there, and I'm not here to judge them at this point. Everybody's entitled to his or her view, of course. But there is surely also a part that plays a role where you simply say, as a country, we want to make sure that the part of foreigners is not going through the roof for patriotic reasons or similar reasons. So that may be another fueling factor for the fact that we have these constraints.
Absolutely. So now you identified the issue that is at hand. Of course, we are also curious to learn about what SWESA is now doing or has planned to actually solve this issue. So what do you have in store for us? What can we expect on that level?
Yeah. So, of course, I would wish to tell you that we have all the solutions already in place and it's just a matter of execution. As always with political process, it's not that easy, but I still do have some good news in the sense that SWESA identified this as one of the pain points, as already discussed. And we were not the only ones. So also Economy Suisse is looking into this, and Deloitte made a very interesting study in that respect. And in fact, we were joining forces for the purposes of the last meeting with the group of members of parliament that is connected to SWESA in order to discuss the limitations and how they affect startups and innovative SMEs in this country. And there is really a momentum at the moment in this topic, which is not something that you would take for granted. We already talked about the fact that it's a politically charged topic, so it's not easy to have discussions about that. But there seems to be quite a degree of support among different stakeholders that argue that this country is or must be interested in attracting talent and shouldn't pose too many obstacles, especially to high qualified people. So if people who have exquisite know-how or expertise are not really eligible to enter the country because they are third country citizens and the employer is not able or cannot afford to go through the entire process, then we as a country are really losing out on opportunities. So this is shared by many people who look into this. And I really believe that there is currently a chance to bring about some change, because we would obviously not propose to turn the system entirely upside down. We're not here to make radical changes, but we are here to propose that access of highly skilled people, or people with a very distinct expertise that is crucial for growing companies and innovative companies, that there be a separate, that they are going to be treated like a separate category, while still observing the overall contingent system which we have in place in Switzerland. So as mentioned, I think as long as you try not to come across with radical ideas, there is also a basis for making or bringing about some change on the legislative level. And we just had, I think 1 week ago, this session with the members of parliament, where we also promoted a startup to tell his story about the limitations and constraints that they face. Was a representative of On, a company surely everybody knows in this country and hopefully is proud of in terms of its achievements. And the members of parliament that had participated in the session, and they were actually quite numerous, they're really interested in learning how this can be improved. And there is still a motion pending in parliament which is trying to aim in the same direction. And that's why I really believe that there is a certain momentum. And we, as SWESA, will certainly continue to keep close links to the members of parliament that are connected to SWESA in this framework, and make sure that it's going into the right direction and not landing in some drawer where it's serving as a dust collector. So this is, in a nutshell, what SWESA is currently focused on.
Fantastic. Really glad to hear that there is movement and also progress being made. Just a random follow-up question here. You know, now with COVID, a lot of the work shifted to remote. We meet virtually. So there's also a less big need of really being in the same place, in the same office. So to that degree, do you think that this is also a chance for us to hire people from all over the world that might not be able to get into Switzerland, but still they work from their home country or where they are based, but we would still have the advantage of being able to source internationally? Is that something that you also see as a potential trend to at least somehow overcome this issue?
To some degree, I agree with you. Clearly, COVID has shown us Zooms, MS Teams, and whatever they are called are there to be used, and it can really add to the efficiency of collaboration in general. So the digital wave that has come with this COVID crisis clearly mitigates to some degree the difficulties that we were just discussing. But I also believe that it primarily has an impact with respect to people who have a very clear job profile, where they have specific tasks that need to be done, where you can typically, allow yourself that people are actually placed remotely rather than really integrated physically in your main office or main headquarters or whatever you want to call it. And I think that's exactly the crucial point, because for growing companies, sure, at some point they may need staff on more general function levels, but in the very upscaling phase, it's crucial that you find people who know how to scale a company, how to attract the right people, how to make the processes efficient within an organization. And these people are usually C-level or below C-level positions that we're talking about. And I think from a company's perspective, you would not be so open and convinced about the fact that somebody is doing this remotely, as opposed to be really sitting with people, because I think despite all the efficiency gains that we have with virtual meetings and stuff like that, I think most, if not all, would agree that there are also limitations in terms of, culture, spirit, and some intangible aspects of collaboration that you simply don't have in a virtual place, as opposed to working closely together physically.
Fully agree. So it can help, but it will not be a sustainable solution to the issue at hand, basically.
That's how I see it, absolutely.
Makes sense.
We know interruptions are rude, so we'll make it quick. The more positive ratings we have, the more people we can reach. So if you want to hear more from the Swisspreneur team, give our show a rating on Apple Podcasts. It only takes a minute.
So I also wonder, you see both sides now. You see the political level by talking to politicians and being involved on that level, but you also talk to many startups. Obviously, they are your clients, but because you're also embedded in the startup ecosystem. So I wonder, what are some misconceptions that you think startup founders have regarding Swiss politics?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, and I don't know whether this really resonates with the audience, but I don't think that people, especially founders, perceive Swiss politics as something of general controversy. I think many people, either because they're Swiss and they've known the system for a long time, or they come from an outside country and see Switzerland as a rather pragmatic country when it comes to the political system. So I wouldn't say that Switzerland per se, presents itself with controversial aspects when it comes to the political system. I actually think it's almost to the contrary. So at least one recurring theme is, and this won't come as a surprise to you, I'm sure, because you surely also heard it in other instances. People that come from outside, they are always surprised at how low level the contact with the tax authorities in this country is. I mean, you can really pick up the phone and talk to your tax inspector or whatever the function is, and you can also benefit from tax rulings, which is more a technical aspect when it comes to startups. But this is something that is not for granted, that shouldn't be taken for granted, because in other countries it's simply not available. So I would actually, challenge a bit the question in the sense that actually the general perception is good. Where I clearly believe, and this may also be the direction that where you were aiming at, maybe with your question, where I do believe that Switzerland as a country still has a lot of catching up to do is with respect to the general entrepreneurial environment and spirit. I mean, there is a lot of entrepreneurship in this country, and it's growing from the very small position that I have in this ecosystem and from what I'm seeing. But it's surely not a country where, the risk-taking would be written on every forehead. It's actually more the contrary, as you know. And so we are rather a risk-averse society overall. And I think in that context, there is still a lot of catching up to do, in the sense that we need to embrace entrepreneurship and the risks that come with it, together with the opportunities, more and more. And in that context, small bracket, I just find it absolutely fascinating to see how our technical universities are evolving in this area. So if you look at the number of spin-offs that this country produces, it's on an absolute level, absolutely competing with other countries, including the US. So the output from technical universities in terms of generating spin-offs is really substantial. And that shows that there is a lot of will out there to actually take on entrepreneurial risks, which is something that is very, very encouraging for all of us, I think. But I still think that the general perception and culture could be improved so that we also don't have to be ashamed if something goes wrong. I mean, we all know that if you go bankrupt with your company, many people would say, oh, he went bankrupt. I mean, have you heard about that? And so you would still have a tendency to feel ashamed, whereas as the general saying goes in the US, people clap on your shoulder and say, hey, great, now you have an experience more, on to your next adventure. And I think in that context, culturally, there is a lot of catching up to do. But I don't think that we have so much to do with respect to the political system per se.
Fair assessment, I would say. We recently also interviewed Kaspar Kopetti, one of the founders of On, and he actually mentioned his co-founder, Olivier Bernhard, who once said that Switzerland had more money than actual ideas. So this goes a bit in a similar direction to what you just mentioned, but what do you think about this assessment?
Yeah, it's an interesting assessment, and I would agree in the sense, yes, there is a lot of money available in this country. And so if that is the case, then you start to wonder, or at least ask the question, well, is this money also going into entrepreneurship? And probably as a general statement, if you look at it from a traditional point of view, then I would fully agree with the statement in the sense, that there is more money than ideas. But if I look at the trends and the recent developments over the past few years, and again, I'm just judging and observing from my little point in this ecosystem, I can clearly see very encouraging signs that actually ideas, not only ideas are picking up, but actual implementation of ideas in the purest sense of entrepreneurship are taking shape more and more, which I think is absolutely important. There are actually several studies out there which are not frequently talked about, which measure the innovation power of Switzerland as a country. And I'm sure when I talk to you about innovation power, you would say, well, we always rank number one in all these international rankings. Yes, that's true. But the fact of the matter is that the studies show that the innovation power of Switzerland over the years has been declining. So we really cannot, just be happy with what we have accomplished and achieved in the past, which was, by the way, mainly fueled by big pharma and big companies and not necessarily startups. So we really have to take care of the future of entrepreneurship in this country. So every effort and every idea and everyone who thinks about embarking on a new venture should be met at least with the possibility to do so, which also requires ultimately money and people who are ready to believe in something and take some risk. But I think that the signs are encouraging. To answer the question, I think the statement is definitely getting more and more out of accuracy, which is good news for Switzerland.
Exactly. I also think that the Swiss Venture Capital Report from 2019 showed that there were more than 2 billion invested in just 1 year in Swiss startups. And I think that's also a really encouraging sign to have this new record, like all-time record. So, as you say, the signs and the arrows are showing in the right direction, but we need to make sure to keep the momentum going.
Fully agree. And just to add to the encouraging news from what we see and know with respect to 2020, it seems like that we can hold the level that we have achieved in 2019, if not even surpass it. So COVID until now has had a very limited impact on the startup and venture capital market, which is fantastic news.
Absolutely. Probably also thanks to the low interest rates and the money flooding by the central banks. So you need a good investment alternative, basically.
Surely true. We're not complaining about that.
That's right. So now we would also like to talk a bit about the future. But before we do so, we want to, of course, also know about some learnings that you made over the past months and years. So basically, when you think about SWESA, what have you recently learned that you say, hey, this might not have turned out as planned, but we actually learned this and that, maybe on a political level, but also on an internal organizational level?
I mean, SWESA was incorporated in March 2020, so it's still a young organization. There is a limited track record, if you want, but still, I'm happy to share some learnings. And I think one of the more surprising learnings from my personal perspective is that it would be really wrong to assume that people within the government, within the administration, are not interested in making the situation better. So one might think, if you talk about how the situation for startups in this country could be improved in terms of framework conditions, You could assume that people in the administration, they don't really care, they've always done it like this, so they don't want to change. And the interactions that we had with different people or with people on different levels within the administration actually point in a very different direction. They are very keen in learning and understanding how the situation really is and what they can do on their own end to contribute to the solution. And of course, those politicians that are connected that form the PG of startups und Unternehmertum, they clearly have their own very enthusiastic interest about making sure that something happens. There it's less surprising, of course, but that within the administration there is so much openness. This was one of the actually encouraging and for me surprising learnings. That's one thing. Then the second thing is, we are all used to make things quickly and swiftly, and we want to get things done. We're impatient, and when it comes to political processes, then patience is required, and this can be sometimes a bit frustrating. But on the other hand, if you think about it, it's also legitimate in the sense that you really want to make sure that all the stakeholders are properly involved. If you could make a change like this, and then the result would be that a certain group of stakeholders is totally unhappy about it and creates a lot of noise around it, then it's questionable whether this was a good course of action. From what I've seen so far is, yes, it requires patience. So we have to look at it a bit from a different angle as opposed to how we usually get things done.
But I think the first point that you mentioned, this openness to learn and really also change things for the better, I think that's something that we can easily often forget in our own startup bubble, where you just think people don't take us seriously, there's nothing moving. So what you just described is, for me personally as a startupper myself, very motivating and really great to hear that there's an openness and that things are moving in the right direction. So this is really, really great news from my perspective.
We'll do our best that this keeps that it keeps that way, and that we can really also, of course, produce some tangible results soon. So let's hope that we can really follow up on the startup visa topic and potentially also other topics further down the road.
Fantastic. So that's actually a great segue to the next question. What can we expect from you and also SWESA, of course, over the next 12 months? What do you have in store and planned for us?
Yeah, so as mentioned, the startup visa is surely the main focus point where we try to make progress. That's very clear. In terms of other goals that we want to set is we want to make sure that we better understand where the actual needs of the startups are. So we are looking into addressing or finding out what the needs are more particularly in order to refine our agenda, because we still have different topics on the agenda that we would like to look into. One is, and I'm just giving here the buzzword, access to European venture capital, more specifically the European Investment Fund. That would be a political decision for Switzerland to participate in the EIF, which would substantially increase the possibility for Swiss startups to attract European venture capital. And we are, in my view, missing out on great opportunities there, while technically it would be possible for Switzerland to make an arrangement with the EIF, such as other countries have also done. So I think that is one of the topics we want to look into. Other topics involve maybe a bit less sexy topics, so we will certainly see how the tax situation improves or evolves now that certain changes have been brought about. The wealth tax is still for many founders a major concern, especially those that have achieved high valuations now and still have a sizable stake in the company. So there we don't have everywhere yet the perfect solution. So that the tax topic in that sense surely remains on the agenda for SWESA.
So we see you will not get bored over the next 12 months, for sure.
Definitely not.
So now we talked a lot about SWESA, but we of course also want to know a bit more about you as a person. And therefore, we prepared 5 rapid-fire questions for you to wrap up this episode. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So the first question is, what was your summer job as a teenager?
Yeah, there used to be a company called Arbonia Forster in Aarbu, in the part where I grew up, and so actually the first summer job I got there was together with my long-standing friend from childhood, Giampiero, and we received the task of cleaning the archive, or actually tidying up the archive of that company, and it's a very old company, and it was located in the Luftschutzkeller of the company. So we spent our summers there. Usually we spent most of the time smoking, which we gladly ceased in the meantime, but we weren't very productive, to be honest. But great memories.
I'm sure that was a great summer, for sure. What are you actually most proud of in your life?
Proud is maybe a challenging notion. I mean, what I'm certainly very grateful for is that both from a personal / private perspective, I managed to find a person that took it up with me and is still at my side, and we are expecting our first child. So a new chapter is to be written soon. Hopefully, if everything goes well, and so that is clearly something on the private side of which I'm particularly grateful. That is something that I can witness right now. On the professional side, definitely I'm super happy and privileged to have ended up as a startup lawyer. If you are a lawyer, everybody in that realm is looking for, the best fit, product market fit, if you want. Where do you fit in with your interests and ideas and skills? And I ended up in the startup world, and nothing could ever change that for as long as I'm practicing law. So I think having the opportunity of leading a team at Keller Haskara, of being at the forefront of the Swiss startup ecosystem with our practice, is something that is giving me great satisfaction.
And that's probably also why we mentioned passionate in the introduction. Now we know where that comes from. And congratulations on these great news. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
So 3 more questions until you're done. Now, easier choices. Zurich or Bern?
Zurich, clearly.
Fair point.
Chosen home.
Apple or Google?
Maybe I would say in terms of past achievements, Apple. In terms of potential for disruptions in the future, Google.
And what do you personally use? Both
Apple.
Or Apple? Okay.
No, yeah.
And the last one for you today, lake or mountains?
Yeah, so I grew up in Thurgau, not too far away from the Lake of Constance, so I'm a lake guy.
That's also a clear choice. Fantastic. Karim, thank you so much for the insights about SWESA and what you're working on a political level. Thank you for the great effort. I think it's really important. And we're looking forward to hear and read more from you and all the initiatives that you are working on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Silvan, for your interest in SWESA. It was a great opportunity to present the association, and all the best with your great session that you're having here with Swisspreneurs.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.